welcome to another walkthrough. In this walkthrough, we'll go through economics instead of maths. We'll be going through 2012 paper number 21 for economics. Before we actually start solving the paper, there are a few disclaimers that I want you guys to know. Firstly, I will not be solving section number A, and there are two reasons for this. Number one, the questions tend to be extremely data specific. What I'm trying to do over here is to provide you guys with a guide, a toolkit which you can use to answer all questions in your exam paper, especially for economics, because it is one of those subjects where the mark scheme doesn't really give you much information or much detail, to be honest, to be able to answer your questions. So let me just give you a simple example for that. Look at section number A over here. I've intentionally removed the article so that you guys get the point. If you were to read these questions, if you were to pause the video and read these questions from 1 to E, from A to E, you will notice that it is very difficult to answer them without the article, and that's the whole point. The questions tend to be very data specific. You need to have the article to be able to answer them. It's more like a comprehension, and because I'm trying to give you a guide, a toolkit, it's very difficult for me to come up with a guide because every single paper tends to be different from the previous one. Every article is different. So because of that, I decided not to answer section number 1. Secondly, because questions tend to be very straightforward. Out of these 5 questions, and this is just the general trend, you will also notice in another paper, at least 3 of them tend to be around 1 to 2 mark, where you have to use either one word answer or may perhaps give a few sentences, and that's good enough. The last 2 questions might carry 6 or 7 marks, in some cases 8 marks, but for the most part it's very straightforward. All you have to do is read the passage, understand the passage, and answer the question, and also the answers tend to be given in details in your mark scheme itself, whereas that's not the case for your section number B, and that's what we'll get to right now. In section number B, the mark scheme doesn't really give you much answers, and what I'll be doing over here in this entire series is not give you guys moral essays that you can use. What happened right there? Hold on. Sorry for that. I'll not be giving you guys moral essays which you guys can read and try to understand something. Instead, what I'll be doing is giving you guys bullet points. I'll be going through the answers myself, giving you guys notes and bullet points, hoping that by the end of the series you'll develop the ability to create your own bullet points, try to understand what the question wants you to write yourself, and therefore help you understand and answer all the questions in your exam paper. So with that caveat, let's actually start answering the question. Question number two. Explain how the loss of confidence in money will affect economics production possibility curve. From the outset, whenever you get a question, an essay-based question, the first thing you have to do is define your terms. Now, in this question, we specifically have 2 terms that you guys have to keep in mind. The first term is about money. The second term is about production possibility curve. So firstly, you would define money. Why is my pen lagging? 1 second. Explain how the loss of confidence in money will affect an economics production possibility curve. From the outset, whenever you get a question, essay-based question, the first thing you have to do is define your terms. So the first thing you must do is define our terms. Now in this question, there are 2 terms. You have money, and the second term is your production possibility curve. Now you have to keep in mind that the main concern of the question is neither money nor production possibility curve. So when you define them and when you explain them, we'll try to do it as briefly as possible. For money, all you have to do is give a simple definition and write down the functions, and that should be good enough. If the question was focused more on money and what money is, then you would have gone in more details trying to explain the function. But in this case, they're not focusing on money. So when you're defining it, when you're explaining it, give a simple definition which you probably should know from your book, and write down the functions of money, the 4 functions of money: medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account, and standard of deferred payment. And you do the exact same thing for PPC curves. You would define them, and you will maybe draw a graph. Now you don't necessarily need to draw a graph, but if you do draw a graph in your paper, it makes them look much more cohesive and much more interesting to read. So again, you will do it briefly. What is PPC? A simple definition and a graph to go with it. Perhaps give a simple example. Give us an example. Let's say goods and services. Your goods and you have services, and a simple PPC curve, just to sort of examine that you know what you're talking about. And both of these, if you were to do it briefly and concisely, you should get 4 marks easily. Again, your essays, it should not be too short that the examiner thinks that you don't have enough knowledge, and it should not be too long that the examiner thinks that you're simply trying to spill out whatever you have mucked up in your revision. So when you're writing answers and you're writing essays, try to first of all understand the question. Question number 2, part A, does not focus on money, nor does it focus on progression possibility curve. So when you're defining them, when you're explaining them, do it, but do it briefly enough so that the examiner knows that you're not trying to focus on that. Now, if you do that properly, you should get 4 marks. Then we need to move on to the second part of the question itself, which is explain how the loss of confidence will affect the production possibility curve. So how are these both linked together? That is the main topic of the question. Now we know that money has 4 functions. Firstly, money has a function of, let me just change the color over there. Money has a function of medium. Let me just write this perfectly. Medium of exchange. Medium of exchange means it is used something as something common to exchange stuff, a common denominator you can call it. Store of value in the sense that if I were to store $100 today, it would be able to buy the same amounts of goods, same value of good as it would 10 years from now. The third function of money is your standard of deferred payment. I usually call it SFDs for short. Now standard of deferred payment essentially means how much payment. For example, if I owe a certain debt to you and you have to pay it back, I have to pay the money to you, so I can pay it using a common denominator, in this case money. And fourthly, unit of account. The question essentially is that how are these 4 functions of money affecting the production possibility curve? How do they affect, so if let's say for example the money loses confidence, that means money loses its value, how will that affect the production possibility curve? Now you have to keep in mind, I did not mention the word barter in this entire question, and that is because the question does not focus on money, it focuses on money with relationship to production possibility curve. It is very common for students to look at this question and then start writing in details about barter system, which you could do it, which is wrong with it, but it just won't make your answer concise. An examiner wants you to write answers which are both adequate, means it has all the things that you need to know, at the same time it is concise. So medium of exchange, and what will medium of exchange have on your production possibility curve? Well, the first and most obvious one is that it will create inefficiency. Now how will that happen? Inefficiency. So I hope my spelling is correct. Sorry for my spelling, I'm not good at it. So basically, if let me give you guys a simple example for you guys to understand. If let's say I wanted to buy some goods and services from you. Now usually in a normal circumstance, I would ask you how much is that worth. Let's say it's worth $10. I'll pay you those $10 and then get whatever I wanted to get. But when money loses confidence, if I go to you and I say how much is that worth, you might, instead of using money, you could say it is worth, let's say, two gold coins. Now the thing is, I don't have gold coins, so now I have to go to someone who has gold coins and exchange that for currency and then get those gold coins back to the first person and get what I wanted to get. What I'm trying to say is that this creates inefficiency. This makes it much more difficult for society to function when when we lose confidence in money. And therefore, when you have inefficiencies, we know that on a PPC curve, this will cause the point to go inwards, to go towards the origin. The point on the curve is the most efficient level. The point anywhere underneath the curve is an inefficient point. So what you would do is you'll say, hey, how does losing confidence affect PPC curve? Well, it creates inefficiencies, therefore it moves a point lower down the order. Now obviously you can take some examples to explain this. A simple example could be that of goods and service, or apples and orange, any simple example. But even if you don't give an example and you explain it concisely and in a structured manner, you should be fine. Store of value. Well, how would store of value have effect on the PPC curve? Well, the store of value will, if let's say you lose confidence in money, then you will not be able to store wealth over a long period of time in the form of currency. What that means is that your savings will reduce. So your savings will, how do I put it, will die. Let me just put it this way. Your savings will die. How will that happen? Well, let me put it this way. If I have $10 and I can buy 10 oranges in that $10 today, theoretically speaking, if we have confidence in money, that same $10 must be able to buy oranges, the same number of oranges 2 years from now, 3 years from now, theoretically speaking. But if we lose confidence in money, those same $10 will no longer be able to buy that same amount of oranges. What that means is that whatever money you saved, with which you wanted to invest later on, you can no longer do it. What that means is that when you have less savings, you have how do I put it, you have less investment, and when you have less investment, your production possibility curve shrinks. It shrinks to a lower point, so the production possibility curve will move inwards to a lower point. I hope you guys get the point. Again, you can see the chain of analysis which I've created over here. Money, theoretically speaking, has store of value. For example, if $10 can buy me X amount of good today, in theory they must be able to buy me X amount of good, same amount of goods 4 years from now. However, when you lose confidence in money, that $10 won't be able to buy me X amount of goods in the future. Therefore, my savings will have less value. Therefore, my investments will have less value. Therefore, when investments are less, the production possibility curve shrinks to a lower point, i.e. moves towards, or it shifts towards the left. And you can see that chain of analysis which I've created by just simple understanding of what store of value means. Standard of deferred payment will have the same effect as the medium of exchange. Again, standard deferred payment means you're trying to pay off debt. You're trying to pay off debt using a common denominator, in this case currency. When you lose confidence in currency, obviously it will create inefficiencies, because now if you want to pay someone else's debt, you need to go and do what they want you to do. If they don't have confidence in money, let's say if you owe me some amounts of money, and usually you would pay me in the form of currency, but if I lose confidence in currency, I could make a demand. Let's say instead of currency, I'm on, let's say, certain amounts of goods. So now you'll have to get those goods and then give those goods to me to get rid of that debt. So you can see that inefficiency being created will have the same effect as the medium of exchange. Means your point will move from the curve towards the origin. Unit of account does also have the same effect as the medium of exchange and standard deferred payments. Means it can also have the effect of shrinking the curve, but it will generally create inefficiencies. So long story short, all you have to do is, if you can define the question properly, define production possibility curve and PPC curve properly, you will get 4 marks for that easily. Again, don't make it too short so that the examiner doesn't know what you're talking about. Don't make it too long so that the examiner thinks you are trying to spell out what you have known. Secondly, all you will do is explain, take any 3 or 4 functions of money and explain how that will affect your production possibility curve. You can use diagrams, you can use examples, but as long as you keep it concise, not too short, not too long, it should be able to answer the question. Now let's move on to part number B. Again, discuss the difficulties involved in changing a planned economy to a successful market economy. Again, what's the first thing that we have to do? The first thing we must do is define. Okay, what all terms do we have here to define? Now, before we actually do that, we need to understand what the question is focusing on. Discuss the difficulties involved. Basically, they want you to discuss the transitional process. They want you to discuss what problems you might have when you go from one to the other. So that's the main focus of the question. What terminologies do we have? Obviously, we have planned economy. Obviously, you have command economy. And the third definition that you have to keep in mind is transition. So transition means the period wherein economy moves from one part to the other, from particular nature to a different nature, market to command or command to economy. It's usually command to economy, command to market in recent times. So again, keep in mind, the question does not focus on any 3 of them specifically. The question focuses on transition. So the first two you'll explain briefly. But briefly meaning, you give an example, you give a definition, and then you give a simple example. For instance, planned economy. Planned economy is a one wherein the 3 economic questions, what to buy, what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce, are answered by the government or the industry or the public sector. And examples of such countries could include North Korea, could include China, could include, so you can give some examples, and that should be good enough for you. Command economies, my bad, I should have written free economy over here. Planned economy and free economy. Free economy, on the other hand, is one that is ruled primarily by private sector. The private sector decides answers the 3 basic questions. And again, you can give some examples of free or near free market economies, such as Sri Lanka, such as USA, so on and so forth. If you can do that, you can easily get 3 to 4 marks, which is exactly what you need for knowledge. To be fair with you, question part B don't really have much marks for knowledge, but again, simple definition don't really hurt you that much. Let's get to the main bulk of the question, which is transition. Now, you need to keep in mind, whenever you get a question where they ask you to discuss, Whenever you get a question they ask you to discuss, you need to create a two-sided argument. Discuss means two-sided argument that you can either show advantages and disadvantages or something, argument where you're showing one part of the view compared to another part of the view. What I'm trying to say is that you're trying to compare two different views or two different ideas, and that's the whole idea of discuss question. You're supposed to give a two-sided argument. Now it shouldn't just be all positive, it shouldn't just be all negative, it should be balanced between positive and negative. So let's think about the difficulties. Let's think about difficulties that we can have in a transition, trying to balance it out. Well, from the outside, the first difficulty you can think about is joblessness. So that's the first point you can come up in your mind. Also keep in mind, in economics, when you're given an essay, don't try to always stick to the book. If you have an idea of yourself which you have learned by reading books or reading articles outside your curriculum, outside your syllabus, you feel free to use it as long as you're able to create good points. Well, how is joblessness created in transition of economies? Well, basically, if you move from a command to a free market, you tend to privatize industries, and when you privatize industries, obviously those private companies will try to make themselves more efficient, and in doing so they will cut labor costs, and they'll remove all the labors which are unnecessary, and therefore it will create joblessness. Well, what would joblessness do? Joblessness would create either it can create revolutions, or it can, in general situation, can create civil unrest. Civil unrest in the sense that you might have protest. People might reject the policies, they might want to create another revolution, but the thing is, you'll have some civil unrest. And what will that civil unrest do? It will create instability in the market. Instability. And this is something you have to keep in mind, especially instability. Instability is extremely crucial for investment. The more unstable your economy is, the less investment you will have. Why? Because investors, they want to invest in countries where they see a positive outlook. They see that the company is going towards something better. So when you don't have stability, it leads to less investment. Less investment would definitely mean lower GDP, or lower growth in the economy. Again, you can keep on making your chains of analysis for this point, but again, 3 to 4 chain of analysis is enough. Transition economies, we tend to privatize. In that process, we tend to privatize industries, and in doing so, they make themselves more efficient by cutting jobs, which creates unrest, which can therefore lead to instability, which can therefore lead to less investment and less consumption, which can therefore lead to lesser growth. Second point you can think of, again, these are general points, you feel free to come up with your own points. Second problem is with the legal structure. Now, this is not technically economic based question, but it's something that it is related to another important economic concept. Planned economies tend to have certain legal structure. When you move from that to a free market economy, a free market structure, you have to change some of the nuances, some of the trading laws, some of the ethical laws, so that it is compatible with free market ideas. And in doing so, you have to change the legal structure, and that can be problematic because that can bring bureaucracy in it, or just call it the big B, bureaucracy in it, or political dialogue, political debates, and that can create issues, and it can also lead to corruption. How can changing legal structure lead to corruption? Why? Because when you move from planned to a free market economy, it is very common, unfortunately, for politicians to change the laws such that it can help themselves, it can help them to grow their own wealth. So it can lead to corruption, which can again lead to instability, inefficiency, which therefore leads to less growth, less investment, which can create another difficulty in transition of the economy. The third factor that I can think of, which I'm sure you can also think of, is inflation. And the idea behind inflation is also very straightforward. When an economy transitions from planned to free, obviously maximum price and minimum prices are lifted off. When those are lifted off and prices are set more closer to equilibrium, it causes inflation, and therefore, which can be a problem for which can reduce, theoretically, which can reduce income of individuals, as their nominal income and actual income have a great difference, and therefore it will create one more difficulty. These are just 3 simple points that I've come up with. As long as you guys give a balanced argument, you are fine. Now, throughout this time, I only explained one side of the argument. Let's try to explain the other side of the argument. Joblessness can create civil unrest. However, This depends upon how much joblessness is being created. If the government transitions in a civil, in a more controlled, calculated fashion, you will not have that many joblessness. You will not have that many jobless individuals, and therefore will reduce civil unrest, and therefore will reduce instability, and therefore will reduce growth issues. Again, you're trying to balance the argument. The same thing goes with legal structure. As long as you have a transparent mechanism and there's a third party involved which is there to keep checks and balances, you tend not to have that much corruption. Again, you're trying to balance the argument, trying to present one side of the problem and trying to balance, say, hey, maybe that's not the worst case, and maybe there are some things that may offset it. The same thing goes with inflation. As long as you are transitioning in a controlled, calculated manner, you will not have that much inflation in a country. And we have economies which have transitioned successfully from planned to free market without having lots of issues. Why? Because if you do it properly in a calculated manner, it tends to be fine. Hopefully that answers the question number 2. Again, I'm not trying to give you guys a moral essay. What I'm trying to do is to give you guys a guide which you can use to answer any and all questions as your exam close by and when you're writing the exam, so that it gives you a toolkit, a process, a way of thinking when you see economic question or an essay type question. Obviously you can come up with your own points, but these are just general points you can have in your mind. Now let's move on to question number 3. Explain using elasticity of demand the possible reasons why in some countries there has been increased use of private transport instead of public transport. From the outset, the first thing you have to do is define. In this question you have 3 specific terms. The first term is your elasticity of demand, elasticity of demand. You can also use a short form if you want. You have the second term is your public goods, and then we also have our private goods. In this case, our public good is private. It's not private. In this case, our public good is your public transport, and your private goods is your private transport. Now, if you can do them all, if you can explain them all briefly, you can get 4 marks easily. By briefly, I mean explain what elasticity of define means using definition, and then you can write down different types of elasticity. You can write down the formula of elasticity of demand, and if you really want to go further than that, just give a simple example and explain about it, right? For example, if you get elasticity between 0 and 1, it is inelastic. What does that mean? If you have elasticity between 1 and 0 and greater than 1, what does that mean? And you can give some examples of that if you want, but again, all you want to do is give a definition, a few examples. Same thing with public goods. What is a public good? Definition, few examples. What is a private good? Definition, few examples. For that, you'll get your knowledge marks, you'll get your application marks. This is your knowledge and your application done. The main thing to do is your analysis, which carries 4 marks. For that, you need to understand what the question is specifically asking you. The question in this case is asking you, how is your elasticity of demand, your price elasticity, PED, your price elasticity of demand related to your public good and private good? How explain using it. So how can we use that to explain? Well, for this question, you can have two different ways of answering. The first is by only sticking to PED, and the second is by using general terms. I'll go through both of them just so that you guys understand. Okay, so we know that when a country moves from a public transport mainly consumed economy to a private transport consumed economy, we can assume that the incomes are increasing. Also, we know that our public good, in this case our public transportation, is an inferior good. Now, this is not something which is pretty obvious, and at the same time it's not something which is very obscure either. And our private transport is a normal good. What that means is that as your income increases, people tend to move from public transportation to private transportation. And obviously, as a human being, you want to have more luxurious lifestyle as your income increases. The same thing goes for your private transport. As your income increases, you want to move towards more luxurious, towards more convenient ways of private transportation. So when a country is moving from a public transport consumed economy to a private transport consumed economy, its income rises. So when the income rises, when income increases, obviously our price elasticity of demand is affected. Generally speaking, when income increases for inferior good, the price elasticity of demand decreases. For normal good, the price elasticity of demand increases, and therefore we can use this to explain how the demand for private goods, private transport is increasing, and how the demand for public transport is decreasing. Now, if we can do all of that using our graphs, so using graphs to explain, using examples to explain, you can get all 4 marks for analysis with it. 4 marks in the sense that you'll get 2 marks for explaining in the words, and if you can use graphs with it, and if you can explain it using a proper structure, you can get 4 marks easily. However, getting all 4 marks using just 1 point tend to be doesn't seem to be very applicable to most students. Some students do struggle. So other than your income, you can also come up with other ideas which are related to your PED but not directly related as much as your income. So another point you can think of is your attitudes, your taste and attitudes towards the food. For example, towards the goods over here. For example, as you might be in a culture where people tend to favor private transportation. So or you can be in a culture where people tend to prefer public transportation, or also you can tend to be in a culture where as certain changes comes in, as you get older, you consume more private transportation rather than public transportation. So a change in attitude can definitely have effect on your PED. So you can relate it with your PED. You can say, hey, people's attitude and people's taste have changed, so therefore there's a chance that as economy is moving from economy's income increases, therefore their modes of transportation can also increase. Another reason you can think of could be political reasons. It could very well be that that the political party is not supported in the local region. This is not directly related to your PD, but you can relate it to your PD. It could very well be the region does not support the government over there, so they could avoid using public transport and use private transportation. So a change in politics can have effect on your price elasticity of demand, and therefore it can change the consumption rate of both of them. Other than this, you can also come up with any other point you want, as long as you have a point and you're explaining it properly and you're relating it with PED. You can get all 4 marks and therefore get all 8 marks for your question. So let's move on to part B of this question. Let me research super quickly. Okay, part B. Right. Okay, part B. Part B, discuss the economic reasons for subsidizing public transport and leaving private transport. Again, the first thing to do is define. What terms do you have to define over here? The first term is subsidy. Now, because the question does focus a lot on subsidies, so make sure you're explaining subsidies properly, in the sense that define subsidies, explain the uses of subsidies, why do we use subsidies, and you can use a graph to explain what you're talking about. You can use a graph to explain, a simple graph of simple code to explain what subsidies is all about. I hope you guys are aware of what subsidies are and how to draw a graph of subsidies. I don't want this to turn into a topic tutorial. I want it to be focused more on past paper. So define subsidies, what are the uses of subsidies, and just write down, make a graph and explain what subsidies are, generically speaking. The second question over here is your taxation. So again, define taxation, different types of taxation you can add, and you can explain using a graph what taxation does to the demand and what taxation does to a price of a good or a service. Simple examples are good enough, and if you can do both of them, you can get 4 marks easily. Again, it looks very simple when I say it, but I hope you guys are aware of what subsidies are, what taxes are, and the general contents of your book. The idea of this walkthrough is so that you guys get bullet points, you guys get ideas of how you can develop your own ability to come up with answers, to come up with notes which you can use to write down an essay. The main focus of the question in this case is discuss the economic reasons. So why would a government want to subsidize public transport, and why would a government want to subsidize a private transportation? You can see that in this question we're trying to compare 2 scenarios. So when we discuss, we have to provide both circumstances, both scenarios. Firstly, you can start with on the one hand. Now you can use either on the one hand, or you can use any other subordinate clause to compare. On the one hand, you can talk about, first of all, subsidies. What effects will subsidies have on the private transportation? Well, for obvious reasons, one thing can have is subsidies are usually given to merit goods, and public transport can be classified as a merit good. So if it is given to a merit good, in the sense that people don't really realize its full application in the long run, and it has certain logic to it. For instance, the more public transportation you have, the less private transportation you have, the less pollution you might have, the less congestions you might have. So it does have some sort of merit. It is qualified as a merit good. So on the one hand, giving subsidies to public transportation is a way of reducing market failure. Why is it a way of reducing market failure? Because it is a merit good, and you can talk about why is it a merit good. Therefore, we do have some economic reasons. We do have some economic reasons of giving it subsidies. On the other hand, however, you have to balance your argument in part B. However, it also depends on government information. Government info. It could very well be that the government might over subsidize public transportation, which could be harmful for it. It could very well be the government can under subsidize public transportation. It is also very dangerous for the industry, so it has to be adequate. So it could, however, be that the government is not well informed, and if that is the case, then it may not have economic reasons to subsidize the industry. Another point you can use for balancing it, instead of subsidies, you can also use, maybe it's time to move on. For instance, maybe it's more efficient, maybe it's more effective to have private transportation instead of public transportation. So the government does not have to subsidize public transportation, it can subsidize private transportation. So again, balance your argument. Provide one side of the argument where you're trying to show how subsidies help the market, how subsidies help private transportation, public transportation. On the other hand, balance the argument by saying, hey, yes, this is true, but this may not always be true. In what circumstances? 2 points I have given. One of them could be government does not have information. There's a sense of government failure. And secondly, maybe it's time to move on. Maybe it's more efficient, more beneficial to subsidize something else. So again, you're trying to balance the argument. On the other hand, now you will compare this with taxing our private transportation. So again, you have to explain what taxes are. Just scroll that up. You have to explain what taxes are, which you have done, so don't go into more details anymore. Just briefly what taxes are. Then you have to go into how can tax affect the consumption of private good. Well, you can use a graph for that. How does the tax affect our consumption of private good? Well, if we have taxation, our demand would increase and our price would rise. You can use a graph to explain that, and you can use that to say, hey, why might the government do that? What are the economic reasons for government doing that? Could be possibly to reduce demerit good. I would not say that. I would say that. One reason could be because it might have externalities, negative externalities, specifically externalities. Well, because private transportation, tend to create more pollution, tend to create more congestion, so it can be a form of externalities. So the reason why government might tax them could be to prevent market failure. You can explain that in more details. Another reason you can come up with is government might tax them to change attitude. For example, government is setting up a strict policy to move people away from engaging in activities which create externality, which create market failure. So by taxing them heavily, you do create a change in attitude over a long period of time. These are 2 points, and if you can explain them properly using graphs, using proper examples, you can get 4 marks, 6 marks easily. You can come up with no examples if you want, but this is enough. And then what you have to do is give your overview, give your conclusion. Now in your conclusion, you're never trying to summarize the argument. What you're trying to do is you're trying to answer the question. Now this is completely up to you. This is not something which I will help you with. Conclusion is completely up to you. Maybe the government does have some economic reasons, maybe the government doesn't have some economic reasons. Whatever essays you write, give it a conclusion and also give reasons for it. For example, there are economic reasons for government to do that, to subsidize public good, public transportation, and privatize, to tax private transportation, because it reduces market failure. That's one suitable answer. On the other hand, it also depends on government failure. Maybe the government doesn't have enough information to adequately tax and adequately subsidize. Maybe the government might be involved in some schemes, maybe the government might be corrupt, so you don't trust them in making these decisions. You can come up with any conclusion you want as long as it is concise, as long as it is to point, and as long as it is answering the question, and that should be able to answer both part A and part B of your question number 3. Now let's move on to the final question, question number 4. In question number 4, the question number 4 says use economic analysis to explain the benefits of international trade. Again, the first thing to do is define your terms given in the question. So obviously the first term that is the only term which is mentioned in your book, in your question, is about international trade. So briefly explain what international trade is all about, and then you can move on in explaining the benefits. So in your book is one specific benefit that is focused, that is more focused, which is a competitive advantage. So you can talk about the benefits of international trade with respect to competitive advantage. Explain what it is, explain using a graph, using an example, use Ricardo's principle, and you can use other ideas too to explain how competitive advantage can help a country to increase and prosper in terms of international trade. And if you can do this properly, you can get 4 marks easily, because it's a one big chunky topic, and if you have the ability to explain it properly, concisely, you're good enough. Another idea is to use other benefits which might not directly related to economics. It might be indirectly related, and there is your peace and cultural integration. Now the idea is that when you have a lot of international trade, cultures do tend to merge with each other, cultures do tend to become more peaceful with each other, and that creates stability, and stability is key to investment. The more stable your country is, the more investment you might have, foreign or domestic investment, which again creates another benefit for our country. You can think of more points than these, just 3 points, and as long as you can explain 2 points properly, you will get full marks. You'll get all 8 out of 8 marks. And make sure when you're explaining to list down your assumptions, list down what assumptions you made. For instance, for competitive advantage, we only compare 2 goods and services. We also assume that there are no menu costs, there are no transport costs, there are no overhead costs, so we make lots of assumptions. So the same thing for peace and any other point you will have in your mind. Whatever assumptions you have made, whatever things that you have kept aside, mention them so that the examiner knows that what you're talking about is concise, what you're talking about is something that you understand properly. Part B of question number 4. Discuss whether restrictions on international trade can be justified. Again, one of those questions which is extremely easy to answer. So for A and for part B. Restrictions on international trade can be justified. So basically the only definition you have over here is about protectionism. We can talk about what protectionism is, different types of protectionism, and then the entire question basically entails the advantage and disadvantage of protectionism. So you can list down, which I hope you have in your notes, any 3 or 4 advantages of protectionism, and balance the argument with, however, this may not always be the case. List down your assumptions, etc. And then all you have to do is list down your disadvantages. Again, this entire question, this entire part is all about protectionism. How does it? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages to the economy? And then at last you have to justify your answer. Justify your answer means evaluate your answer. Have a concluding paragraph here. You can give your own answer. Do you think it is better to have protectionism, or do you think it is worse to have protectionism? Now you can go on and on about this topic. It's a very chunky, very juicy, very easy topic in your exam, in your book. So I hope you guys do find this question extremely easy and get full marks in it. There's a simple structure you have to apply. What is protectionism? Advantages, disadvantages. Whenever you have a question where they ask you to compare 2 sides of the same coin, in this case you're discussing 2 sides of the same coin, the coin being protectionism, all you have to discuss is your advantages and your disadvantages and give a final judgment, a final evaluation. And if you can do that, you will get full marks easily. Hopefully this tutorial was helpful, and hopefully I was able to guide you and help you guys understand what type of how you can create bullet points. And as you go on in the series, you guys will have a more clear idea of what I'm trying to say. Hopefully it was helpful, and feel free to give me a feedback.